I still remember the evening at one of London's most exclusive restaurants in Mayfair. A woman walked in wearing a garish wig, heavy clown-like makeup, and an attitude sharp enough to clear the room. She chewed loudly, spoke in clipped, dismissive sentences, and behaved as though she was actively trying to ruin the evening. Because, as she later confessed to me, she was. Beatrice Langham, chief executive of a £500 million tech company, had disguised herself as someone impossible to love just to make one man walk away. But I did not walk away. I sat across from her, calm and unbothered, and started paying attention to exactly the wrong things. Beatrice had a rule she never broke: no blind dates. She had held that rule, and in that time had built her company from a small startup into one of London's most watched tech firms. She had no patience for small talk, less patience for men who looked at her resume before they looked at her face, and absolutely zero interest in sitting across a dinner table from someone her mother had vetted through a mutual connection. The rule was simple. The rule was clean. Then her mother called and used the one argument Beatrice had no defense against: family obligation. She did not know much about the man. His name was Alistair Drummond, a friend of a friend, someone described as stable and serious, which in her family's language meant he had money and was not embarrassing at events. Beatrice did not bother researching me. She had been to enough of these dinners to know they all ended the same way. The man spent the first part pretending to be interested in her opinions, then spent the rest of the evening steering the conversation toward her company's valuation. She knew the pattern. She was tired of the pattern. So before the dinner, standing in her bathroom with a glass of wine she had not touched, Beatrice made a decision. She was not going to cancel. Canceling would start a conversation she did not want to have. Instead, she was going to make me leave. She was going to walk in as someone so completely off-putting that the man would find a polite excuse and disappear, and she would go home, order takeaway, and never hear about it again. It was efficient, it was controlled, it was, she told herself, the rational solution. The wig came from a costume shop near her flat. It was bright copper red, badly layered, and sat slightly off-center no matter how she adjusted it. The makeup took her time to get wrong on purpose. Too much foundation, eyeliner drawn heavier than it needed to be. Lipstick in a shade of dark plum that clashed with everything. She wore a dress that was technically fine, but styled in a way that read as trying too hard. When she looked in the mirror, she did not recognize herself, which was exactly the point. She took a taxi to the restaurant instead of her usual car service, because showing up in a company vehicle would have undone the entire effect before she walked through the door. The Connaught was the kind of restaurant where the lighting was designed to make everyone look as though they belonged there. White tablecloths, low music, servers who moved like they had been trained never to rush. Beatrice had eaten there before, at real dinners in her real clothes. Walking in that evening felt like wearing a costume inside a painting she had once posed for. The hostess gave her a look that lasted half a second too long before leading her to the table. I was already seated. I stood when she approached, which she noted without reacting to. I was taller than she expected, dressed simply. A dark jacket, no tie, the kind of understated that either meant I did not care or that I cared in a way that had nothing to prove. I had a calm face, not handsome in the way that announced itself, but the kind of face that would stay in your memory longer than a prettier one. Beatrice sat down across from me, dropped her bag loudly on the chair beside her, and picked up the menu without saying hello. I sat back down and looked at her without saying anything either. I did not fill the silence with a compliment or a nervous comment about the restaurant. I just waited the way someone waits when they are genuinely comfortable and not performing comfort. Beatrice found that mildly irritating, so she leaned into the performance harder. She ordered for herself without asking if I was ready, spoke to the server in a tone that was several degrees too sharp, and made a comment about the bread basket that was designed to land badly. I watched all of this. I did not flinch, did not straighten in my seat the way men did when they were deciding whether to stay or start formulating their exit. I just picked up my own menu and read it like she had not said anything at all. "You're quieter than I expected," Beatrice said, making it sound like an insult. I looked up from the menu. "You're louder than I expected," I said, and my tone carried nothing hostile in it, just an observation stated the same way I might have noted the weather. Beatrice blinked. That was not the response she had scripted in her head. She had prepared for discomfort, for polite tension, for the gradual building of a social awkwardness that would make leaving feel like relief. She had not prepared for someone who seemed genuinely unbothered. She chewed her bread loudly, talked over the ambient music when she spoke, and at one point made a dismissive remark about freelance work that was pointed enough that most men would have taken it personally. I did not take it personally. I answered her directly, said that I liked the independence of my work, and then asked her a question about hers, not about her company's revenue or its market position, but about what problem she had originally set out to solve when she started it. Beatrice opened her mouth to deflect the way she always deflected that question in interviews, and then stopped. No one had ever asked her that in a first conversation. They asked how big her team was, how she had funded the first round, whether she was planning to go public. They asked about the company as a financial object. I had asked about the reason she built it, which was a different question entirely, and one she had not thought about in a long time. She gave me a short, guarded answer. I listened without interrupting, without the nodding that people did when they were waiting for their turn to speak. When she finished, I said, "That is actually a hard problem to solve," in a way that meant I had heard what she said and thought about it for a moment before responding. Beatrice put her fork down. Something was not going the way it was supposed to go. The dinner stretched on. I did not perform interest. I either was interested or I was not, and right then I appeared to be. I talked when I had something to say and did not fill the spaces with noise. I did not ask about her family. I did not try to establish how my world connected to hers. I did not position myself. I was just there across the table, present in a way that Beatrice was not accustomed to in these situations. By the time the main course arrived, she was still in the costume, still technically running the same plan, but she had stopped enjoying it. Somewhere between my first response and my second, the performance had started to feel less like a strategy and more like a wall she had built between herself and something she could not quite name yet. I had not walked away, and for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, Beatrice was not sure she wanted me to. The dinner ended without the outcome Beatrice had planned. I did not excuse myself early. I did not manufacture a phone call or check my watch with the practiced subtlety of someone counting down to an exit. I stayed through dessert, which I did not order, but sat through while she picked at hers. And when the bill arrived, I reached for it in a way that was not a performance. No glance to see if she would protest, no theatrical gesture, I just paid it. We walked out of the Connaught and I held the door open for her the same way I had held it when she arrived, which was to say simply, without commentary. Outside on the pavement, the evening air was cold enough to make the separation feel natural. Beatrice had her taxi already mentally summoned. She was ready to end the night on her terms. To walk away with the evening classified as a failed experiment she could quietly forget. I looked at her with the same unreadable steadiness I had had all evening and said, "I should like to do this again sometime, if you want to." Not framed as a question exactly, but leaving room for the answer to be no. Beatrice said she would think about it, which was the most honest thing she had said all evening, and got in the taxi. She spent the ride home trying to locate the feeling that the evening had gone wrong. It had gone wrong, she was certain of that. The plan had not worked, I had not left. By that measure, the night was a failure. And yet, when she got home and stood again in her bathroom, removing the wig and washing off the heavy makeup layer by layer, she could not find anything that felt like relief. She felt something closer to the particular unease of a question you did not know you were asking until someone almost answered it. She agreed to see me again. She told herself it was curiosity, which was close enough to true that she did not examine it further. She showed up the second time without the wig, without the theatrical makeup, and in clothes that were simply hers. And when I opened the door of the coffee shop I had suggested, there was no flicker of surprise on my face. I looked at her the way someone looks at a room they have entered before, recognized, comfortable. Beatrice found that more unsettling than any reaction would have been. She still was not herself with me. She kept the walls up, kept her answers shorter than they needed to be, let long stretches of quiet sit between us without trying to fill them. Part of her was still running the original logic. The more difficult she made this, the faster it would end. But I had a way of treating difficulty as neutral information rather than a problem. When she was sharp, I did not soften or retreat. I just responded to exactly what she had said without adding anything to it. When she was evasive, I did not push. I seemed to have a precise sense of where the line was between interest and pressure, and I never crossed it. What confused her most was what I did not do. I did not ask about her company after that first dinner. I did not reference it, did not angle toward it, did not make comments that were designed to let her know I was aware of what she was worth. In her experience, that awareness always surfaced, sometimes subtly, sometimes with embarrassing directness, but always eventually. With me, it simply did not. I talked about a building I was designing in Shoreditch, described the problem of a client who kept changing the load-bearing specifications after the plans were finalized, and the way I talked about it made clear I found the work genuinely interesting, not as a topic of conversation, but as a real thing happening in my real life. Beatrice caught herself listening without performing the act of listening. "Why architecture?" she asked during a gap in conversation she had not tried to manage. I considered the question for a moment, not as though I was deciding what to say, but as though I was locating the actual answer. "Because a building has to be honest," I said. "You cannot fake the structure. Everything decorative is secondary to whether the thing holds up." I said it plainly as a fact, not a philosophy. Beatrice did not respond. She looked at her coffee cup and thought about what it would feel like to be assessed by that particular standard. When I found out who she was, I was at my drafting table with a business journal a colleague had left behind, flipping through it without intent, and then the page turned and the photograph was there. Beatrice Langham in her real clothes at a real event under a headline about her company's latest funding round. The name matched. The face matched under the removed costume of that first evening. I sat with it for a while before I called her. I did not open with anger. I said her real name, which I had known only as Beatrice, and now understood fully, and asked if she had time to meet. My voice on the phone was the same as it always was, controlled but not cold. She knew immediately that I knew because the quality of the silence after my question was different from all the silences that had come before it. We met that afternoon at a bench by the Thames, and I waited until we were both seated before I spoke. "The woman in the photograph is wearing your face," I said, minus about 40 minutes of effort in the wrong direction. I was not smiling, but I was not hardened either. I was simply looking at her with the directness that was apparently just my face's default setting. Beatrice looked at the river. She had rehearsed a version of this conversation in the taxi over. Something measured, something that framed it as a practical decision, something that would position her as reasonable. But sitting next to me with the thing already in the open, the rehearsed version felt like another costume, and she was tired of costumes. "I do it at every blind date my family sets up," she said. "I make it bad enough that the person leaves. It is cleaner than cancelling." She finally looked at me. "You were supposed to leave." I did not respond right away. When I did, it was not with the wounded reaction she had half expected. "Why does it have to be that hard to just say no?" I asked. "Because saying no starts a conversation," she said. "And the conversation is always the same. I am too focused on work. I am too particular. I am too—" She stopped herself. "People assume they know why a woman like me is still single, and they are always very willing to explain it to me." I nodded once, as if that part made sense to me. "Did you think I was one of those people?" I asked. Beatrice did not answer immediately. Then she said, "I thought you would behave the way people behave when they find out what I run and how much it is worth. Everyone does." Eventually, she met my eyes. "You did not. That is the only reason I agreed to see you again." There was a long beat before I spoke. "For the record," I said, "I thought there was something off about you that first night. The wig was—" I exhaled in a way that was not quite a laugh. "I did not say anything because it was not my business, but you were clearly uncomfortable the whole time, and not in the way someone is uncomfortable on a bad date, more like someone wearing shoes that do not fit." Beatrice looked at me for a moment without speaking. In years of running a company, in years of rooms full of people paid to observe and analyze, no one had said anything that precise about her. It left no room to deflect. She told me the truth then, not all of it, but enough, that she had been cycling through her family's introductions for some time, that every man she met through those channels arrived with a prior understanding of her net worth that colored everything that followed, that she had stopped trusting first impressions because first impressions were always about the company and not about her. I listened to all of it without the expression people wore when they were waiting to offer comfort. I just let her say it. When she finished, I said, "That sounds exhausting," simply, without decoration, and somehow that was more accurate than anything more elaborate would have been. We kept seeing each other after that, quietly, without announcements. I did not post anything, did not mention it to people outside my immediate circle, and Beatrice told no one inside hers. For a while, it was just dinners and long walks and phone calls that went longer than either of us planned. It felt like something fragile that would survive only in the absence of outside weather. But outside weather has a way of arriving anyway. It started with a single item in a business column, a gossip note, barely a paragraph about Beatrice Langham being seen repeatedly with an unknown man. The description was flattering to neither of us. Freelance architect with no significant industry profile. By the following week, the tone had shifted. A financial blog ran a piece implying that a man with my lack of corporate standing had no plausible reason to be in Beatrice's orbit unless the reason was financial. It was phrased carefully, just close enough to insinuation without being a direct claim. But insinuation in that particular world was sufficient. Beatrice's head of communications sent her a message asking if she wanted to make a statement. Her board chair, a man named Gerald Foss, who had opinions about everything that touched the company's reputation, called her and used the phrase, "optics concern," 3 times in 4 minutes. Beatrice listened to all of it with the flat attention she used when she was deciding whether something was a real problem or someone else's discomfort dressed up as a real problem. The distinction mattered to her, but the distinction was getting harder to hold. For my part, I said nothing about the coverage to her directly. I had seen it. It was impossible not to. But I did not raise it. I did not ask her to make a statement or stay quiet or take any particular position. I just continued to show up the same way I always had. Present, undemonstrative, steady, which under ordinary circumstances she would have found reassuring, but now felt like watching someone stand on ice without knowing how thick it was. She started measuring the distance between my world and hers in ways she had not before. I worked independently, structured my own hours, moved through the city without the weight of a public profile. Beatrice moved through it differently. Every public appearance was logged, every photograph potentially captioned, every association a variable that someone somewhere was already calculating. She started returning my texts a few hours later than usual. She stopped mentioning when she would be free the following week. None of it was decided consciously. It was the slow rearrangement of behavior that happens when a person is afraid and does not want to admit what they are afraid of. The article that ended things ran in a publication that business people actually read, and it made the suggestion with enough structured argument to sound responsible. The headline was, "Who is Alistair Drummond, and what does he want from Beatrice Langham?" The piece ran through my professional history, noted the modesty of my client list compared with the scale of her company, and ended with a quote from an unnamed source that described me as strategically positioned. Beatrice read it early one morning, standing in her kitchen before she had had coffee, and felt the specific cold clarity that comes with a problem that has arrived in a form you cannot simply ignore. She called her communications director. She sat in 2 meetings that morning where the article was discussed as a company matter, not a personal one. By the time she got to the part of the day when I would normally have texted, she had been thinking about risk management for 6 consecutive hours, and had lost the boundary between the professional and the personal, which was a boundary she usually guarded carefully and had let slip without noticing. I called instead of texting. She answered. I asked if she had seen the piece, and she said yes. And then I said quietly that it did not matter to me what people assumed, that she knew the truth, and so did I, and that was enough for me to stay steady on it. I said it simply, without pressure, the way I said most things. And Beatrice, inside hours of board language and damage control framing, heard it as naive. She said, "Alistair, this affects the company. I cannot pretend it does not." There was a quality to her voice that she did not fully register in the moment. The clipped, managed tone of someone addressing a problem, not talking to a person. There was a stillness on the line. Then I said, "Is that what I am? Something that affects the company?" My voice had not changed in volume or temperature, which made it worse. Beatrice said, "That is not what I meant." But she did not say what she did mean, and in the absence of that, the words that were already on the line just sat there and did their damage. I said I understood. I said it the way someone says they understand when they have decided not to ask again. And then the call ended. I did not reach out after that. Beatrice set her phone face down on her desk and went into her next meeting, and she did not let herself think about it until late that night when the building was quiet and the day's logic had finally run out of room. I had looked at her, the real her, the one underneath the wig and the performance and the years of professional armor, and I had stayed. I had stayed through the disguise, stayed through the revelation, stayed through the weeks of her pulling quietly back, and then she had said exactly the wrong thing in exactly the wrong tone, and she had made me feel like a liability, like something to be managed. I had left because she had shown me in the clearest possible language that even she saw me the way everyone else said she would. Beatrice sat at her desk in the dark and understood fully and without comfort what she had just let go of. She gave it some time. She told herself it was because she needed to think clearly, and thinking clearly required distance from the immediate feeling, and the immediate feeling was too large to work inside. Those were reasonable explanations. She had built a career on reasonable explanations. But eventually, sitting in her flat, with the city laid out beyond the window, and nothing requiring her attention until morning, she ran out of reasonable explanations. And what was left underneath them was simpler and harder to argue with. She had hurt someone who had never once tried to hurt her, and she had done it efficiently and deliberately, the way she did most things. Beatrice was good at a specific kind of honesty, the kind that lived in boardrooms, in negotiations, in the clear-eyed assessment of risk and return. She could tell a room full of investors that a product was not ready and watch the temperature drop and hold her position anyway. She had never had difficulty saying hard things in professional contexts. The difficulty, it turned out, was saying true things in personal ones. Not because she did not know the truth, but because in her personal life, the truth always arrived with exposure attached, and exposure had never felt safe in the way that competence felt safe. She thought about what I had said at the bench by the Thames. That sounds exhausting. And how accurate it had been, not just about the blind dates, but about the whole structure she had built around herself. The disguise on the first night had been its most literal form. But it was not the only form. She had been disguising things for years. The fact that she was lonely in a way that success did not fix, the fact that she had stopped believing anyone would look past the company to find her specifically worth knowing, the fact that somewhere in the last several years she had quietly given up on that possibility without naming it a surrender. I had not looked past the company. I had looked at her before I knew about the company and then known about the company and looked at her the same way. That was the thing she kept returning to, not as a romantic abstraction, but as a concrete and specific fact. The man had seen her in a garish wig behaving badly, had found out she was one of the most recognizable business figures in the city, and had not adjusted his posture toward her in either direction. I had just continued to see exactly what was in front of me. Beatrice had spent years building things that worked. She recognized, sitting in the dark, that she had just destroyed the one thing that had ever worked without her having to engineer it. She called her communications director and said she wanted to make a statement. Not a company statement, a personal one. Her communications director, a sharp woman named Dana Raw, who had managed public-facing crises for a decade, went very quiet for a moment and then asked what the statement would cover. Beatrice told her. Dana said, "You understand this will reframe the entire narrative about you, not just the article." Beatrice said she understood. Dana said, "And you want to do it anyway?" Beatrice said, "Yes." Dana was quiet for another beat and then said, "Okay, let me help you do it right." The statement went out on a Friday afternoon, timed for the end of the news cycle the way Dana always timed sensitive releases. It was not long. Beatrice had written the first draft herself, and Dana had refined it without removing its essential quality, which was that it was direct and personal and did not sound like it had been written by a committee. The statement said that the woman in the restaurant on the evening in question had been Beatrice herself, wearing a deliberate disguise. It said that Alistair Drummond had known nothing about her professional identity when we met, had behaved with complete integrity throughout, and had never at any point attempted to use our acquaintance for professional gain. It said that the insinuations published about me were false, that the source of the situation was her own choices, and that she was making this statement because a person who had done nothing wrong deserved to have the record corrected. She did not frame it as a PR move. She did not attach it to any company announcement or use it to redirect attention toward a product or initiative. It was simply the truth stated plainly under her name. Gerald Foss called her within minutes of publication and said with the careful tone of a man choosing his words that he had concerns about the optics of the statement itself. Beatrice told him she appreciated the input. She did not change anything. She drove to my building on a Saturday morning without texting first, because texting would have given me the option to decline before she had had the chance to say what she came to say. She was aware this was not a consideration I had ever extended to her. I had always given her room to say no, and she noted the difference without feeling good about it. The building was a converted warehouse in Clerkenwell, the kind of neighborhood that was halfway through becoming something else. She rang the buzzer for my flat and waited. My voice came through the intercom after a moment. Flat, but not closed. She said, "I know I should have called. I just needed to say something, and I was afraid if I called, you would tell me it was fine, and I would never actually get to say it." There was a beat. Then the door buzzed open. My flat was the way she would have expected it to be if she had ever thought to expect anything. Open and ordered, with drawings and plans on one wall, and bookshelves that were clearly used rather than arranged. I was in a plain shirt, and my feet were bare, and I looked like a person interrupted in the middle of an ordinary Saturday. I did not fill the space between us with small talk. I just stood there and let her speak. Beatrice had thought about how to start this. She had drafted versions in her head, organized arguments, considered framings. Standing in my flat, all of it fell away, and she said the only thing that was left. "I treated you like a variable," she said, "like something I had to account for. And you were the first person in years who looked at me like I was just a person. And I responded to that by talking to you like you were a line item in a risk assessment. I am sorry. That is what I came to say." I looked at her steadily. I did not rush to respond, but it did not feel like withholding. It felt like I was actually taking in what she had said before I decided what to do with it. The quality of my attention had always been like that. She realized I did not perform listening. I just listened. "I read the statement," I said finally. "I know," she said. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," she said. "You did not do anything wrong. The least I could do was say that where people could see it." She looked at me directly. "I also wanted you to know that I meant what I said on the phone. It came out wrong." "What did you mean?" I asked, not sharply, but with the same precise interest I applied to everything. I wanted the actual answer. Beatrice took a breath. "I meant that I was scared," she said. "I have spent so long protecting the company, protecting the image, managing what people see, and when the pressure came, I defaulted to that. I spoke to you in board language because that is the language I use when I am protecting something. I did not realize until afterward that I was supposed to be protecting you instead." She met my eyes. I have never actually had someone to protect before. I did not know what it was supposed to feel like. I was quiet for a long moment. I moved to the small kitchen area and poured 2 cups of coffee without asking if she wanted one, because she did, and apparently I already knew that. I set one on the counter near her and then leaned against the opposite counter with my own, and the distance between us was not hostile. It was just honest. 2 people in a room with the truth, already said, and the next step not yet decided. "You wore a wig to make me leave," I said, not unkindly. "You were still trying to make me leave on the second date. You took some time after that phone call before you came here." I said it without accusation. I am not saying any of that as a complaint. I am saying it because you should know that I noticed and I stayed paying attention anyway. That is not something I do automatically. I looked at my coffee cup for a moment. It meant something to me. What happened on that call also meant something to me. I need you to know both of those things are true at the same time. Beatrice nodded. "I know," she said quietly. "That is why I came." I looked up at her then, and something in my expression shifted, not dramatically, just the way a room shifts when someone opens a window. "What do you want, Beatrice?" I asked. Not what you think is practical, not what works for the company. What do you actually want? She had been asked versions of this question before in strategy sessions and investor meetings and profile interviews, and she had always answered it in the language of goals and metrics and vision. She stood in Alistair Drummond's flat with cold light coming through the tall windows, and she said, "I want someone who sees me when I'm not performing anything, and I want to stop being afraid of what that looks like." She let the words sit. I have not wanted something like that in a long time. I do not entirely know how to do it. I set my coffee cup down. I crossed the space between us and stopped close enough that the conversation was no longer across a room. "It is not that complicated," I said, and my voice had the same unhurried quality it always had, but closer now. It had a warmth she had not let herself notice before. "You just have to show up without the wig." Beatrice made a sound that was close to a laugh, real and unguarded in a way she had not been in my presence since the afternoon by the Thames. I was not smiling exactly, but there was something in my face that had not been there at the beginning of the conversation, something open and decided. I handed her coffee back to her and she took it. We did not resolve everything that morning. There was no speech that sealed it, no single moment that rewound the damage and replaced it with something clean. What there was were two people sitting at a kitchen table for the better part of 2 hours, talking the way we had talked in the earliest part of knowing each other. Without agenda, without performance, without either of us running a separate calculation behind our eyes. Beatrice told me things she had not told anyone in her professional life. I told her things that were quieter and smaller, but offered in the same spirit of just being honest about what my life actually was. We talked until the coffee was gone and the light in the flat had shifted from morning to midday. When she left, I walked her to the door, and before she stepped out, she turned and looked at me the way she had been unable to look at me that first night, directly, without the protection of a character she was playing. "I should like to do this again," she said. "The right version of it." I looked at her with the same expression I had had in that first restaurant, that unhurried, accurate attention that had unsettled her because she had never encountered it before, and now understood was simply what it looked like when someone was genuinely present. "Yeah," I said, "I know." She took the stairs down instead of the lift. Outside, the street was ordinary and cold and entirely itself, and Beatrice Langham walked through it as exactly who she was. No disguise, no performance, nothing managed or calculated or arranged for someone else's consumption. Just a woman on a pavement who had, for the first time in longer than she could clearly account for, told the complete truth about what she wanted and been met with something that might, if she let it, turn into the real thing. She did not know yet if she would be good at this, but she showed up without the wig. That was where it started. I never imagined that a single evening at the Connaught in Mayfair would reshape everything I believed about love and courage. Yet here I stand, Alistair Drummond, reflecting on the woman who walked in wearing a garish wig and an armour of deliberate rudeness, only for me to fall for the real Beatrice Langham beneath it all. She had built walls so high around her success in the city that she disguised herself to push me away, terrified that anyone who glimpsed her true self would see only her empire rather than her heart. But I stayed, and in doing so, I learned the hardest, most beautiful lesson of my life. Authenticity is the only foundation worth building on. We all hide behind masks, hers of power and independence, mine perhaps of quiet detachment. But the moment we drop them, as she finally did at my flat in Clerkenwell, revealing her fear and her longing, everything changes. It broke my heart when the world's whispers nearly tore us apart. Yet her bravery in standing bare before me taught me that real love demands we protect each other, not our reputations or our carefully curated lives along the Thames. Vulnerability is not weakness, it is the bravest act of all, and the greatest gift we can give or receive. If this tale has stirred something deep within your own chest, if it has reminded you of the masks you still wear, please leave a comment below and share your story. I read everyone. And if stories like ours from the streets of London move you, do subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these honest voices alive.